I am live. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Boudreau from Geeks and Gains. Thanks everyone who stops by. Today I'm trying to put out some more geek-based content. So this is my first ever Geek in Review. I'm going to be reviewing one of my all-time favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, which I actually just finished rewatching it, though I've seen it probably 15 or 20 times already. Check out my geek swag here today, the Doctor Who Abbey Road. Also, one of my favorite all-time shows is the new Doctor Who, especially through David Tennant. Today we're dealing with Star Trek Next Generation, to boldly go where everyone has gone before. The episode happens in Season 4, Episode 21, and it's right after Cupid, which is another one of my absolute favorite episodes. And Season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation is... if you never plan on watching it from start to finish, Season 4 is the end of very last episode of Season 3, because they usually do two-parters. They have a cliffhanger at the end of seasons. Back when, before they just put everything online all at once, they would just do cliffhangers at the end of the season. So, have my snapbacks for life. So I think that this episode is really important because it has to do with a lot of current legal issues and ethical questions that I think are timeless. There's a timeless struggle between, what we're dealing with now of security and freedoms. We have this kind of dichotomy between the two, and there's a constant tension between the two in our legal systems and our overarching ethical and moral frameworks in which we evaluate and view the world. So whatever our paradigm is, we have to understand what the strictures are and what our protections are. So just a little bit of overview. This one occurs on Stardate 44769.2. I don't know what the point 2 denotes. It's a metric in time. In Gene Roddenberry's future, the Anandeo, BCAD, or before Common Era, the new BCE. Those kind of time frames on how we evaluate time don't really make sense. 300 years in the future. So when they're in space, they need some sort of way to delineate what's going on and to give you a reference point as to when things occur. So they have star dates for the uninitiated. Generally speaking, there's some big players that you should know about. There's, kind of the protagonist throughout this episode is Jean-Luc Picard, and I'm endeavoring not to touch my face during the rest of this video. So I'll be trying to enact my qualitative social distancing in evaluating this episode. So Jean-Luc Picard starts out the episode where they've uncovered what appears to be a Romulan spy on the USS Enterprise. And so the USS Enterprise is the flagship for Starfleet. And so Starfleet is the scientific and military basis of exploration for the Federation, which is known as the Federation of Planets. And so there is an individual who is a Klingon exobiologist, and just a little background on that. The Klingons and the Romulans actually have a long history, and are in fact have been mortal enemies for generations. However, there's a small clan of Klingons that would rather not have the alliance that they have with the Federation, and would much rather have subvert the powers of the Federation with a new Romulan Klingon alliance. So those are the kind of the geopolitical dynamics that are going on in this episode. And so you have the opening scene, which deals with the Klingon exobiologist, which even scientists within the Klingon Empire are kind of a rarity to be spoken about, because the Klingons are a huge warrior race. And so there's an investigation that's being done because it's found that the specific diagrams of, like, say, the dilithium chamber from the USS Enterprise end up in Romulan hands a week later after this individual had been on the ship. And so they actually determined that this individual, it's actually really interesting to note that I don't know that this technology actually existed at the time, but I do know that it exists now. So there's a process in which you can encode information through DNA and through other DNA information through the four substrates of the DNA code, which is really interesting. So you have DNA encoding of information in this episode that they actually can do now. So I'd be really interested to see the genesis of the time frame between when that actually became possible. So now they can actually code, like, rather than using 0 and 1s, they can use DNA information, which is really interesting. And the big reason why I like this episode is the title of the episode is called Drumhead, because it's in a reference and allusion back to old military style drumhead style types of dispensation of justice, in which you would have the trial and jury as the person at the drumhead, usually some sort of military official. And so I think it's really interesting that they make reference to that, and they harken back to that and talk about, the ability to investigate someone and create these strictures and links in the world of conspiracy is actually rather easy. And in the Federation, they refer to it as the Seventh Declaration of Rights, which is very similar to our Fourth Amendment against search and seizure, and our Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And so they cannot devise and infer someone's guilt because they refuse to answer questions. And I think that's kind of the salient legal issue that sticks with us through time and time again, because one of the main benefactors of Fourth and Fifth Amendment protections are often criminals. And so our legal system has to ensure that we maintain our rights while trying to put guilty people in jail, which is, the ends of what we seek in a just society, which is people who commit crimes should be put to the proper punishment, up and including jail times. But the character at issue is a medical personnel individual who's not necessarily a member of Starfleet, because they don't go through the academy through officer training, but the individual's name is Mr. Tarsus, and he sadly lies about his entrance application about the heritage of his father. His father was a Romulan as opposed to a Vulcan, as he had stated. And so for anyone who at least ancillarily knows who the Vulcans are, Leonard Nimoy's historic character, Mr. Spock, is a Vulcan, and they are distant relatives of Romulans that live on different planets that split apart many generations ago. And so one of the main admirals, who's essentially the prosecution in this case, is an Admiral Sati, and she is a daughter of an acclaimed judge, Judge Aaron Sati. And really, my favorite part of this is at the end, whenever it's a historic line from Jean-Luc Picard that he quotes, and he says, with the first link, the chain is forged, the first speech censored, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, changes all irrevocably. And Jean-Luc Picard goes on to state that this is both wisdom and warning to future generations for individuals who are concerned about moving past the difficulties that we have in prosecution and jumping straight to judgment. It reaffirms the notions of due process and the right against self-incrimination. And I think it's a really poignant and timeless episode for that reason. I know that the old Next Gen is by far my favorite, though there are a lot of hokey parts because the technology just wasn't quite the same as it is now. And since they relaunched Picard, I think that kind of amplifies it. But I think it's a really there are just so many quotable lines from this. Like at the very end, Jean-Luc Picard kind of deflates the Admiral Sati, and her seeking to prosecute someone based on what essentially are the logical fallacy of cum hoc ergo propter hoc, which is correlation not equaling causation, because at the same time that they discovered this spy, who there is a spy, no doubts about that, there's an explosion. But it just turns out to be a structural defect it was essentially a cover hatch, and is not some greater conspiracy. This is really great too, because it brings out the early issues that Jean-Luc Picard has to deal with in season 4, when he is, spoiler alert, when he is taken over by the Borg and becomes the Locutus of Borg. And so I think it's, there's a lot of playing on pathos and ethos about, who has the moral high ground in this, and who can use passion to try and overcome some of the more logical consistencies for due process. And I think that it's a very important episode, because it demonstrates that the purposes of due process are to protect every individual, not just the specific individual defendant. And it's very easy to lose sight of that, especially when there are, as someone who works in the legal field, when there are people who are being accused of very heinous crimes. You want those people to be served justice. And there's just an old adage in the law that we say, the justice systems would prefer that 10 evil men go free than one innocent man be put behind bars. And I think that's because it goes back to, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with now, which is rugged individualism, our rights to freedom, and the fact that we in America really value individuality and our individual presumption of innocence in our legal constructs. And I think that needs to continue. And I think we, the great thing about Gene Roddenberry is that he saw that what struggles were going to be timeless, and touches on them in a future context that are devoid of a lot of current politics, but I think remain relevant to us politically currently. And so this is my geek in review of the episode of the Drumhead episode, which I think is ultimately resolves around the idea of vigilance, which is the price that we constantly have to pay in order to ensure that our freedoms are protected. And so I think that's where we leave it off today, is that we should live our days and our lives with vigilance, looking out for both our individual well-being and the well-being of others. Thanks for stopping by. And if this becomes regular, I might do multiple reviews if people kind of enjoy it and like it. If I get likes here, I'm going to do a crossover on my fitness page for Geeks and Gains. If you go to my Instagram account, which is Dreaux Fitness, DREAUX Fitness, all the likes that I get here, I'm going to do push-ups on that channel. I've ever done some push-up challenges, so if it's significant and we get some likes, then you guys can see me do push-ups there. Until next time, thanks for stopping by here at Geeks and Gains.